Oh, Isekai, how you've changed? I mean, not really. Basically, Isekai has been probably one of the most standardized genres in all of anime. It is, frankly, unusual how such a standardized and specific type of show became so prevalent that it became its own genre. Real talk, Isekai in itself is such an interesting phenomenon that you could probably do a whole video on that alone, and I wouldn't be surprised if some other people already had. But today, I want to talk about how to make Isekai great again. Just kidding, that's a total lie. Today, I want to delve into some of my problems with the Isekai genre, and some ways I'd like to see it improved on, or at least explored. I mean, I love this genre just as much as the next person, but there are certain, dare I say, tropes that really bother me, and instead of complaining about them like I usually do, I want to actually talk about some ways that they could be changed for the better. But first, a huge thing to the sponsor of this week's video, Crunchyroll Games. Shield Hero is coming to mobile. Grand Summoners is a mobile JRPG by Crunchyroll Games. The awesome thing about Grand Summoners is that they actually use real anime characters. Right now you can get Naofumi, Raphtalia, Philo, and Melty from Shield Hero for a limited time. And if you download Grand Summoners soon at got.cr/ManimeMatt, you'll receive a free 5-star Naofumi by completing the first 10 exclusive Shield Hero quests. There's also a ton of new Shield Hero equipment you can get, along with even some Shield Hero chat stickers. So go download Grand Summoners at got.cr/ManimeMatt to play the Shield Hero event and gain a free 5-star Naofumi. Now a quick heads up before we dive into this full force. I am talking about the specific Isekai genre that everyone is most familiar with, i.e. Sword Art Online, Log Horizon, and so on. I know technically there are many subgenres of Isekai and some people really geek out on that kind of stuff, so I do need to say that I am by no means an expert on the Isekai genre field. So obviously take everything I say with a grain of salt, and there are exceptions to everything I say. If you want to know more, feel free to do your own research. Like I said earlier, this whole genre in itself is such an interesting phenomenon. So let's talk Isekai. Earlier I mentioned that I love the genre, and I do mean that, but there are many things about the genre that I feel like have stagnated over the past couple of years. And one of the tropes that I've begun to hate the absolute most is what I like to call one-trick isekais. Basically, in another world with a smartphone, in another world but we're all high school prodigies. Basically, shows that take the classic premise of isekai and go, yeah, but what if we change like only one thing about it? These shows irritate me to no end because the lack of creativity in these is just atrocious. Sure, it's cool to have one cool neat trick, but most of these shows surround their entire premise off of these single one tricks. It's just so bad and should be avoided at all costs. The easy solution to this is just to never do it. Simply changing one thing about a show that's been done 1,000 times becomes incredibly predictable and is near impossible to watch beyond the second episode because that specific one trick has often lost all of its novelty by that point. Another point I've begun to dislike about isekai is often the main protagonist. For some reason, isekai have begun making whoever the protagonist is as generic as humanly possible. He is almost always some otaku who's just a real nice guy who was down on his luck in the real world. And that's his defining character trait. He's really nice to everyone. Look, I get it. It's escapism and people want to project themselves into the story, but I think a much more compelling narrative could be created if you had someone unique. I mean, hell, that's kind of been my baseline for good isekai recently. I think Shield Hero is a good example. He's not an otaku, and frankly, he's kind of an ass. He is still generic, but at least he's kind of unique, and that makes a world of difference. I mean, the best case I can come up with off the top of my head is Cautious Hero. He is just a jerk and is this super demanding, over-the-top character that frankly carries the show at times. He is awesome and the kind of character I would like to see more often. Now, while we are on the subject of characters, let's talk supporting characters. I'd beg to argue that side characters are often probably some of the stronger points of most isekai. However, I am going to use this time to complain about a specific facet of side characters. I despise it when shows make it appear as though literally everyone back in the past were just complete morons. I hate shows where the main character who is from another land just has leagues of information on everyone else, and everyone else is just a bunch of bumbling idiots whose jaws hit the floor literally anytime the protagonist states an obvious fact. It's dumb, no one likes it, and people back then weren't that stupid. And do keep in mind, I am specifying a difference between stupidity and ignorance. I'd just really like to see an anime where the side characters who have lived in that world all of their lives are, well, competent. And this is more so a minor complaint. A lot of shows do in fact do this. It just particularly pisses me off when a show pulls this card. By the way, I am totally okay with a comic relief character, don't get me wrong. I think that would be a solid and frankly good exception to this rule. But I am asking for some competent characters with maybe even specialties. I think that would be a cool way to give the supporting characters a way to actually support. So, time to beat a dead horse real quick. Fantasy? Come on. There is so much fantasy out there. Can we maybe see some cyberpunk? Maybe post-apocalyptic? Hell, I'd even take fantasy except without magic. I think that would be a cool twist. I mean, I get it, I love fantasy, it's just a bit tiring. I mean, that's one of the reasons I love Excel World. It's an isekai with no fantasy elements. Sorry, I just had to make mention of it. Another big topic I want to talk about is the whole traveling permanently to another world thing. I don't think that's completely necessary. I would love to see some anime like Excel World where the two worlds are connected. And as much as I hate Gate, I do admit the fact that the two worlds were connected was pretty damn cool. I think one of my biggest problems with the worlds not being connected is the lack of consequences. Now, I get that a lot of characters will think of the consequences in that world, but it would be so much more unique if consequences overlapped into their real world as well. A good example of this, ironically enough, is the original Sword Art Online. Death in the game meant death in the real world, and despite my gripes with this show, that hook really makes all the players think twice and realize the importance of their actions and the consequences. I mean, it's kind of hard to call it an isekai, but Darwin's Game is pretty similar in that manner. So let's say, for example, you're ready to write your own isekai. You've decided on a fantasy setting, and the protagonist is going to be staying there permanently, despite all of my previous suggestions. So now, for one of the most difficult choices you will have to make. How will you get them there? This is another point of contention I've had with isekai recently. A lot of the time, it feels as though their transitions into another world is seemingly random. There's no meaning behind it. It's either the character died and was reincarnated or he read a book. I would like there to be actual meaning behind the reasons they were teleported to another world. One of the only shows I can think of is Overlord. The character was playing his MMO until these servers went offline and was teleported to that world at that exact second. Now, it's nothing impressive, but it gave meaning to the reason he was teleported to another world. I just want to see more shows where the way they are brought into another world is more important to the narrative and actually has some sort of explanation besides, the gods decided that you need to be in this other world. Also, while we're on the topic of other worlds, why does it feel like none of the protagonists ever have any culture shock? Now, I kind of get it for shows where they get teleported into a game they used to play, but for random characters who are brought into seemingly random worlds, a lot of the time they just instantly get accustomed to their new surroundings. There's no scene where they realize that they may never see their family or friends again. Not to mention, they don't have any access to the internet or on-demand entertainment like cell phones. Frankly, I think our generation in particular would struggle heavily in getting accustomed to a fantasy setting. I think the first few episodes of any isekai should at least cover these bases. And finally, probably my last minor gripe about isekais, the overpowered protagonists. I've just grown so bored of them. I mean, they are funny when they're subverted like in Cautious Hero, but it's just become such a staple. I think that's secretly why Grimgar of Fantasy and Ash is probably one of my favorite isekai. It really shows just how unfun and dangerous a fantasy world would be. It's also an excellent character drama for any of you guys who are interested. I mean, I get making our characters a little strong, but often they are just completely overpowered to the point where most of the encounters feel meaningless. And that's how we make Isekai great again. I just would really love to see a show implement multiple ideas like this instead of implementing one or another, because so far that's kind of how it feels. I'd love just a genre breaker to come through and completely renovate isekai, and I think that's what it needs. It's one of my favorite genres in anime, but there's no denying that it's become quite stagnant in the past few years, and sooner rather than later, people will lose interest. I mean, the harem genre is the perfect example of something getting so generic that it burnt itself out and now only lives as a subgenre in other shows. I'm afraid isekai is going down that path itself. Hopefully we'll see innovation soon, and I hope they're like my ideas, because if so, we can truly make isekai great again. Thank you guys for watching, and a huge thank you to Crunchyroll Games for sponsoring this week's video. Also, a big thank you to my patrons. You guys are my heroes. Make sure you guys share, like, comment, and subscribe. This has been my Matt. Make sure you guys stay man and go watch that goddamn anime.